Besides lending the handkerchief, I had also asked her when she was leaving. Actually, I'd asked if I could see her the next day, but she was leaving that day, and she said she'd be leaving on the morning bus at sort of 10 o'clock or whenever it was it left Inverary. So that was that. I was fairly free in my movements on the ship because sort of being in charge of the Landycraft and the other two fellows willing to work for me, I was able to get away, and so I was there a good half hour, I suppose, before the bus left, and waited and waited and waited until Connie arrived with her mother. Her mother came down to see her off. And so I was introduced to your great-grandmother, and also was able to say cheerio to Connie and wave her away on the bus. And I reminded her that she'd borrowed a handkerchief from me, and shouted after her as she was getting on the bus that my name was T.H. Butler, and my address was HMT Ettrick. And of course, she wasn't able to come up to the, she couldn't get away every weekend, so she wasn't able to come up the next weekend. And it was a couple of weekends before I saw her again, or before she was up there. I didn't actually make arrangements to see her, so I had to keep my eyes up when I was ashore to see if she was around. And I did on one occasion call up to the house. I learnt where where her mother lived. And of course I knocked on the door and her mother came to the door, and I asked if Connie was there. Well, I asked if I couldn't have said Connie, I can't remember exactly what I said, but anyway, she called to Connie's sister, Madge. She shouted to Madge, who was upstairs, that there was a sailor there to see her. And of course, when Madge came down, I said, "This is the wrong one. Have you got another daughter?" And she said, "Oh, you must be looking for Connie. She's still in Glasgow." But eventually we got into a pattern of meeting. We didn't have any hard and fast arrangement to meet because Connie's visits were sort of intermittent. But I think there was one occasion she told me that she was standing in a queue for the cinema, and the local cinema was specially there for the Army and the Navy, and she was standing with another fellow in the Army queue, and I was ashore with some other fellows, and we were going to the cinema too, standing in the Navy queue. And Connie saw me standing there, and she said to the fellow she was with, "I'm sorry," she said, "but I could see my cousins over there, and I'll have to go and be with him." And so she left the fellow she was with and came over and talked to me and went to the cinema with me. And I can remember on another occasion where she said that the girls saw me walking through the town, and one of the girls shouted, "Oh, there's Tom," and they all darted behind a tree and hid. And then, of course, Connie stuck her head out to have a look and see, and I saw her, and then we got together again. So there were little things like this that went on. And then the ship was sent to Glasgow for some sort of overhaul, and we went we went alongside at Glasgow, sort of into the dock there, and I don't know what sort of work they were doing in the engine room or somewhere, but they shut off all the heat. And we spent the Christmas of 1940 there lying alongside. We were able to go ashore as much as we liked. All the Merchant Navy crew left the ship, except for one or two maintenance. And the gunners left. And the only people that were aboard there were the Navy crews. And we were given leave. But of course we only got a week or so's leave, and I went down to Plymouth to my uncle and aunt there that I was brought up with after my mother died, and spent the leave down there. And of course Plymouth was being bombed at that time, so everybody used to get up during the night and go down to the air raid shelter. And I probably quite foolishly said, I'm blowed if I'm going to get up for Hitler. And I used to stay in my bed. It was much warmer than out in a cold, drafty and damp air raid shelter. And of course my uncle was a fire watcher. He worked in the naval dockyard there. He was a shipwright to trade and had worked in the naval dockyard at Plymouth for years. And he was on call as a fire watcher. And he used to, when there were air raids, have to go out on patrol and see if there were any incendiary bombs being dropped on the houses. And they'd go up and try and get them out of the roof or wherever they were burning and throw them outside. So it was very often quite hectic. I can remember being at a dance there and people leaving the dance and going to the air raid shelters because of the bombs dropping on the town, and some of us still foolish enough to dance on and say to hell with Hitler and the Germans, we're not going to stop our dance for them. And then walking home from the dance, perhaps seeing a girl to her home, with the air raid still on, and with the houses burning here and there, and wreckage strewn across the streets from where bombs had blown up places, and just walking home through that, and perhaps walking in the wrong direction sometimes. If you think, well, you'd have to see the girls home, and we didn't seem to get taxis in those days, so I suppose we weren't rich enough or something. And so we walk in the opposite direction to our own home and see a girl to her house, and then walk another 3 or 4 miles in the right direction to get home. It was sometimes, well, in those days we used to say we used to have a worse time and were in more danger when we were on leave than when we were on the ships in the Navy. So we went back after we'd had our repairs and things done in Glasgow, and just about froze. I can remember sleeping in our bunks on the ship there with 5 or 6 blankets on us, because there was no heat in the ship. The engine room was working, and there's nothing more cold than being in Glasgow and on a ship with no heating. Anyway, we went back to Inverary again and took up our old job of training the troops with our landing craft being used. And I got to know a lieutenant engineer in the shore base there, which was called Quebec. HMS Quebec was the landing craft shore base at Inverary. And they built more and more huts, Nissen huts, and enlarged it. And it was quite a big concern as it got towards the end of the war. But of course we saw it in the very early days. And I got to know this engineer lieutenant, and he said, you should apply for our commission. I could recommend you. And I said, oh, I don't know about that. He said, oh yes, he said, you should. He said, you should apply. And I said, well, I'll think about it. And it was only a week or so later than that, early in 1941, that the other two fellows came to me and said, we've got a bit of a problem. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, well, Jock said, Dennis is drafted. He's got to go to another ship to go on some operation or other. And I said, oh gosh, that's a shame to see Dennis go. I said, we're sorry to lose you, Dennis. And he said, well, they both said, started trying to persuade me. They said, we thought that, you were used to being on your own and you'd been on one or two operations. Perhaps you would like to go in Dennis's place. I said, well, I don't know about that. They said, well, we've been together all the war. They've only been in it a few months. He said, we joined up together and we've been together and we'd just like to see if we could stick together a bit longer, if you would go. And I, rather foolishly, again, I seem to get myself into these things, so I said, okay, I'll go. And joy and delight on their faces, of course, and they rushed off to see if they could arrange that I would go in Dennis's place. And they came back and said, it's fixed, you're going. So there was me with Connie ashore, and of course we're only good friends at that time, and really casual friends. And I think I may have taken the job. I thought, oh, well, I must get away from this girl, or I'll be marrying her or proposing her something. And so I was a bit chicken in that regard, I think. And then there was the other thing about becoming an officer. I'd forgotten all about that. And anyway, away I went and to join a ship. And the ship I joined was the RFA Dewdale, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and it flew a blue ensign, and it was a tanker. It was a tanker that belonged to the Royal Navy, but apparently all the fleet auxiliaries that were used to fuel the fleet were under the blue ensign. So I had this beautiful blue flag flying at that. And it was quite a long and fairly large tanker, and on the decks of the tanker, nicely lined up from bow to stern, with the bridge in the middle, were 14 landing craft. There was, I'm not sure how they were disposed exactly, but there must have been 6 at the bow, or maybe 6 at the stern, and 8 at the bow, whichever way they went. I'm not sure which was the longest part of the ship there, but there were 14 altogether, and they were LCMs. And the LCM would carry 2 small brain gun carriers or a tank. Just one tank on the deck. And it had 2 engines and 2 propeller shafts. And it had a crew of, there was a lieutenant in charge of the landing craft, and there was a sub-lieutenant engineer called Place, who I didn't get on along with very well, because I was used to being my own boss, I think. And there were a couple of other motor mechanics and a wireman, someone to do the electrical work on the landing craft.